Continue our summer series, 10 Things We Hate About God, that very inappropriately titled sermon series. And if time permits, we'll look at two things, and it looks like more like it will be one thing. God is all-knowing, and God is all-powerful. You might ask yourself, well, why would I hate it that God is all-knowing, or dislike that He is all-powerful? And I just think of that call to worship that we had this morning from that psalm where it says things like, before a word is on my tongue, you know all about it. That's neat, that's comforting and joyful, and at the same time, for some of us, a little disconcerting. Really? You remembered when I lost it the other day? You knew that even before it came out. Okay. So it can be one of those things that we question. Besides the fact that, quite frankly, all these attributes, we really would rather have them for ourselves. Self-centered as we can sometimes be. We often live as if everything depends upon us and our activity and our knowledge and our authority and power. And we don't want to give it up. Not to anyone or anything. But as we look at these attributes of God, and these are incommunicable attributes, which is just a fancy word that means these are attributes that God has that we're not supposed to have. And yet it's those attributes that we want. The ones that we are also to have, things like holiness and goodness and charity, love. Yeah, those are nice. But we'd rather be all-knowing and all-powerful. And so we want to claim the mantle of God Himself when we have those wishes. A quick review. In week 1, we looked at God as Creator. In week 2, God as Father. And we mentioned that this God, who's transcendent over all things, as Creator, was compared the following week with His intimate, close-by relationship as Father. The two fit together. As Creator God, He has the right to give us rules. As Father, He has a moral goodness to give us rules that are to our benefit, not our harm. See, the two fit nicely together. The next two will too is God's omniscience, His all-knowingness, and His omnipotence. They are often considered together when we study. But before we move ahead, you might wonder, why study these attributes at all? These perfections of God. Why don't you just give us the rules, set them down for us, and we'll just follow them? That's a good plan. I think that's a good plan. But if you're anything like me, you sometimes find it hard to go through those rules without first seeing, knowing, and being very aware of who God is in His character. Are these for my good? Are these ultimately for the good of us all? And the more we think about God in a correct way, the more able we are to humble ourselves and to live out the rules He gives. You see, the way we think about God matters, and it matters greatly. And most of us, if we have a bad view of God, are not going to carry out the rules that He sets down because we see Him in a bad light. Many of us are there. Many of us struggle mightily with the pain that we don't feel was just. And it's so easy to pass judgment on God, to say, I can see this working out better. Don't tell me there's a better way to do it. I know. When we do that, we take away from God Himself His all-knowing omnipotence and His all-knowing greatness about Him and say, no, I can't pass judgment on you, God. people of God in times past were famous for doing this. Repeatedly in the prophets, they're called back to stop judging upon God, stop doing things that are wrong, to simply live out a faithful life, to live rightly and justly, to do what's good. And even when they did their religion correctly, God was not someone who would just say, well, you're doing fine now. If their hearts were far from him, he would say, what is this trampling of my courts? The way Isaiah opens up. What makes you think I want all your sacrifices, says the Lord? I am sick of your burnt offerings of rams, the fatted cattle. I get no pleasure from the blood of bulls and lambs and goats. When you come to worship me, you ask, who asked you to parade through my courts with all your ceremony? Stop bringing to me your meaningless gifts. The incense of your offerings, they disgust me. As for your celebrations of the new moon and the Sabbath, and for your special days of fasting, they are all sinful and false. I want no more of your pious meetings. I hate your new moon celebrations and your annual festivals. They are a burden to me. I cannot stand them. When you lift up your hands in prayers, I will not look. Though you offer many prayers, I will not listen. For your hands are covered with the blood of innocents. Wash yourselves and be clean. Such strong words, opening words of Isaiah, to draw the people back to a heart towards him, and not just compliance of these religious matters. You see, those very things that God says he won't receive, he declared were the very things they should be doing. And yet he rejects them because the heart has rejected him. Jesus reflects these same sentiments in the New Testament when he says, when you're coming to worship and you remember that your brother has something against you, first go make it right with your brother, he says. Then come back. It's easy to miss those things. It's easy to hold hostility towards one another. It's easy to pass judgment on God and tell him, no, you haven't done right by me, and I'm not going to make things right by this person. If you only knew what they had done. See, how we think about God matters. I'll go a step further. Thinking rightly about God, about his character, that is worship. Just thinking rightly about him is worship. Worship begins with right thinking about God, and worship is right thinking about God. We honor him by thinking rightly about him, and those right thoughts lead to right actions. See, our goal is not simply to work through these perfections of God, these attributes, as some theological exercise. How impractical would that be? But rather to focus like a laser upon his attributes, because they impact the way that we then will live. So let's start with God's omniscience, his complete knowledge. I mentioned already, this is one of those attributes that we want for ourselves. It's knowledge is power. You've heard that expression. It's wrapped up in our DNA. Consider the man's first sin. You remember as Adam and Eve are in the garden and Eve is tempted, what does Satan tell her? You will not die. For God knows when you eat of this tree, what? Your eyes will be open. What's that? That's knowledge. You're going to gain knowledge. See, God's holding it back from you. You will be like God, knowing good and evil. And when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food, pleasing to the eye, and desirable to make one wise, knowledge, wisdom, she took an egg and Adam See, that's it. With knowledge comes power, and knowledge comes control, and we don't want to trust God as much as we want to have control over life itself. Think about this. How often do you get angry? I'd ask myself that, but of course I never get angry. As often as we get angry, it's saying we're unthankful for everything that came from the hand of God. You cannot be thankful and angry at the same time. It's impossible to be thankful and angry at the same time. And so, it's a fool's bet, I think. The desire is there, that one that will not satisfy, to reach out and try to claim that knowledge for ourselves. See, man will, after the fall, scurry from God and from the understanding of their very own nakedness, the very thing that they share in common with now the serpent. They have become not like God, but like the serpent. See, it's not that God doesn't want us to be knowledgeable. Rather, He commends knowledge. But it's knowledge as born of humility, knowing our place under an almighty God. God is knowledgeable because His person is infinite. So He is all knowledgeable. We can never be full of that type of knowledge because we're created beings. All we can do is get drunk upon that type of desire for absolute knowledge. We crave to know more. We crave even to know the future. It's what diviners do, what palm readers do. We want to know what's ahead. We want to know what's just around the corner. We want to know. We want to have some inkling. We don't go to Him, but we go to others who say they can tell us a little bit about our future. Give us some sort of hint at least. Or we'll look to the stars. Do they tell us our future? Is it in our stars to know what's going to happen? And we trust these other points of knowledge, sometimes more innocently than guilty in our own hearts, at least in our own judgment. But they can lead to just other idols that form in our hearts for other bits of knowledge that are beyond us. They can lead to other things too, Ouija boards and tarot cards. Others, the stars themselves are other gods. But what does God want from us? Very simple. Peaceful, restful trust. Trust Him. Consider Psalm 131. I love Psalm 131. One of the reasons I love it so is it's got 3 verses. I love short books. I love short chapters. When I get to heaven, I'm going to look up Luke and find out why his chapters are so long. Psalm 131. What does He want from us? Peaceful, restful trust. My heart, this is verse 1, I'll just read through it. My heart is not proud, Lord. My eyes are not haughty. I do not concern myself with great matters or things too wonderful for me. See the sense of understanding where we fit in His created order. Or things too wonderful for me, but I have calm and quieted myself. I am like a weaned child with its mother. It's an unfortunate translation. Most of them have it. My Hebrew professor threw a fit when he read this to us one day. He says, not weaned. The word simply means that the baby has stopped feeding. He's weaned for that day, if you will. My wife tells a story. I hope this is not inappropriate, Laura. You can stop me or try. Got a microphone. of feeding was it our youngest? I think it was our first. You don't know where I'm going. And she was nursing her, and when she was done, she would just lay her head back and go, that was Jim. That's what God wants for us. There's your word picture. That peaceful, restful, complete comfort in the mothers. And here's another motherly figure of God. This is an illustration of that. I'm like this weaned child. This child who's completely satisfied in the mother, who's done feeding. Like a weaned child, I'm content. And then the point, third verse. Put your hope in the Lord, both now and forever. How neat. Restful. God's knowledge. What is it like for Him? It's absolute. And we don't need to inform God. When we sometimes talk to Him, it seems like sometimes we get caught up in telling Him all the details. But if He didn't know, it's like, God, you know about that? Okay, I'm bringing it to you right now. We save a little time. Spend more time worship. Yeah, I do the same thing. You don't need to inform God about things so He can make up His mind about it. Well, let me think. See, if God has to make up His mind about something, He doesn't have all knowledge. He's kind of coming up with it as He goes. And that's not who God is. There are things that God cannot do. Did you know that? Can't be evil. Possible for Him. He also cannot deduce things like you and I. Can't do it. He already knows it. Can't be done. We can take comfort in that God. We don't understand it. It's beyond our measure of understanding, but we take comfort in that He knows what He's doing. Psalm 139 that we read together. You have searched me. You have examined me. You've looked at, and therefore you know me. You know me fully well. Everything about me, every part. Our content knowledge of Him shows in a contently lived life. And all of this brings forth that hope. Place your hope in Him and none others. I'm going to skip over that next part. And we're just going to finish up with knowledge here. And we'll pick up on all-powerful. Probably not next time, but another time. We'll scoot it down the way. One of my favorite verses is Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. And you're probably familiar with this. It's one of those that people memorize. And, you probably know it well. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your ways, and do not lean on your own understanding." Don't trust in your own understanding, great as that may be for you. But rather, in all your ways, now listen carefully, in all your ways what? In all your ways, you memorized it, acknowledge, right? Acknowledge Him. In all your ways, I'm going to give you a different group of words. Know Him intimately. Know Him intensely. Know Him with every fiber of your being. That word acknowledge, it's an intensified word of the word knowing. And that word in Hebrew, when it says know, is an experiential knowledge. We are to know Him intensely. The word acknowledge is kind of like the tip of the hat. Okay, I'll make my plans, Lord. Lord, these are my plans here. Now you know, and I know. I'm going to go do my plans. We fit perfectly with the word acknowledge as we use it in our English language. Well, I acknowledge God. I gave Him, He's there. It's not the Hebrew word. It's know, take it to the next level. It's an intense, intimate, experiential knowing. The promise at the end that He will make your path straight, where He will guide your steps. Not just an acknowledgement of him. The NIV, I think, is interesting with the way it translates it, because almost every translation will go with acknowledge. It's when a verse is well known and the translator comes to it, oh, woe be it to the translator. It changes a very well-known verse. It says, I'll use that word there. It's not really communicating anymore like it used to back in the 1600s. But the new NIV has, in all your ways, submit to him. Submit. Is the word submit in there? No. It's not in there. The word is know, intensified knowing. The idea is right. It's like, I know him so well that I'm going to submit my life to him. That's the idea. That it's that type of bending the knee, that I know him so much that I know my place before him, and my only place before him is to hit my knees. That's the way I can know God. In humble submission. Do we know God like that? He knows us so intimately. Do we strive after that type of knowledge of him? Not to claim more, but to humbly submit. Do we submit to his word? Do we realize that no other source of knowledge will do for us? That every attempt at gaining knowledge outside of his revealed word and through him himself is a grasping after what God himself has. As we humble ourselves before Christ, I think of how the book of Hebrews opens, where it says, Jesus Christ, the Son, in the long lineage of the prophets, the Son comes. He's the exact representation of the Father, where all completeness lies in him. Do we know him intimately? When we study about Christ, do we know him intimately? Do we bend our knees towards him? After all he's given us, as he's come and he's died and he's reached out his hands upon the cross, everything for us to bring us to him, do we just humbly submit and say, my joys in you? What I think is right is not right unless it comes from you. The joys I think I have are not joys unless that joy comes from you. We're going to close today with a praise song called God of Wonders. Think about the life we live. Is it first and foremost an understanding of Christ and his ways, trusting his eternal knowledge, and not to elevate our own pathetic chance at trying to get more knowledge? Let's close with prayer. Father, thank you for your knowledge that is too wonderful for us. We praise you for your amazing plan. We humbly bend our knees to praise